How Virgin Mountain Man ordered a bride, but the most famous paygirl stepped off the wagon. The dusty street fell silent. The church bell rang once, and every eye in town turned to the scandal no one saw coming. He only wanted a wife to share his lonely cabin, but instead, he's handed the past everyone whispers about. She swears she's ready to change her life, to leave the saloons behind. But before they can even speak their vows, a powerful cattle baron storms in with papers that could drag her back into bondage. The sheriff rattles his jail keys and the town watches with cruel delight. Out on the mountain, under firelight and hymn songs, their bond begins to grow. Yet in the courthouse, her secret past is laid bare, and only one man's courage can break the chains of shame and forge a new beginning. Is love strong enough to stand against gossip, greed, and the law of men? Or will a Virgin Mountain Man lose everything for the woman no one believes can be redeemed? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The morning sun had barely begun to paint the eastern sky when Ethan Hale's weathered boots crunched against the hard-packed dirt of Main Street. His tall frame cast a long shadow as he made his way toward the gathering crowd, his heart thumping like a hammer against wood. The small frontier settlement of Pine Creek was already stirring, despite the early hour. Horses nickered softly in their hitching posts, and the smell of wood smoke drifted from morning cook fires. Ethan tugged nervously at his freshly pressed shirt collar. He'd spent hours getting ready, even trimming his usually wild beard and attempting to tame his thick brown hair. The letter from the church agency had promised a good Christian woman, someone suited to frontier life, someone plain and practical, they'd said, who understood the challenges of homesteading. "Reckon that's the Denver Wagon coming now," old Tom Willis called out from his place on the general store porch. His announcement sent a ripple of excitement through the growing crowd. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them behind his back. "Lord, give me strength," he whispered, his deep voice barely audible above the growing murmur of townsfolk. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. Most days, he kept to himself up in his mountain cabin, trading furs and doing odd carpentry jobs when supplies ran low. The wagon train appeared through the morning haze, wheels creaking and horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the lead wagon rolled to a stop. The driver, a weather-beaten man with gray whiskers, consulted a piece of paper. "Got a Miss Devlin here," the driver announced, "for Mr. Ethan Hale." The crowd parted as a woman in a striking scarlet traveling dress descended from the wagon. She moved with a grace that seemed out of place in the rough frontier town, her auburn hair neat beneath a modest bonnet. Something about her seemed familiar, though Ethan couldn't place it. Then the whisper started. "That's the dance hall woman from Leadville. The paygirl from the Silver Dollar, known clear to Denver she is." Each harsh whisper felt like a physical blow to Ethan's chest. His face burned hot with shame as recognition finally dawned. He'd seen her once, months ago, when he'd delivered lumber to Leadville. She'd been singing on the Silver Dollar stage, her voice clear as mountain water. Christine Devlin stood straight and proud despite the jeers, though Ethan noticed her knuckles were white where she gripped her carpet bag. Her green eyes met his directly, showing neither shame nor defiance, only a quiet determination that stirred something unexpected in his heart. She approached him with small, measured steps. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, her voice carrying only to his ears, "I came in response to your advertisement. Honestly and in good faith." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry as prairie dust. He was acutely aware of every eye in town boring into them. Mrs. Peterson, the preacher's wife, made a sound of disgust and turned away. Several men laughed openly, their mockery cutting through the morning air. "You're not," Ethan started, then stopped, unsure how to continue without causing more hurt. "What you expected," Christine finished for him, a sad smile touching her lips. "No, I suppose not. But I can cook, keep house, and work hard. I know my Bible, Mr. Hale, and I know what it says about redemption." Ethan's mind whirled like autumn leaves in a storm. Everything in him wanted to flee back to his mountain sanctuary, away from the knowing looks and cruel whispers. But something in Christine's steady gaze held him in place. He'd seen that same look in the eyes of wounded creatures he'd tended, dignity in the face of pain, courage despite fear. "My wagon's this way," he found himself saying, his voice gruff but gentle. He took her carpet bag, noting how light it was, and offered his arm as proper manners dictated. Christine hesitated only a moment before placing her gloved hand on his sleeve. Together they walked through the gauntlet of staring faces. Someone spat in the dust near Christine's skirts, but she didn't flinch. Ethan's team stood waiting, the big bay geldings pawing restlessly at the ground. He helped Christine up onto the wagon seat, trying not to notice how the morning light caught the copper highlights in her hair. As he climbed up beside her, someone called out a crude suggestion that made several men guffaw. "Ain't you got better things to do?" Ethan surprised himself by calling back, his deep voice carrying an edge of steel that silenced the laughter. The wagon wheels creaked as they pulled away from town. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the trail ahead, but he was aware of every small movement Christine made beside him. The silence between them stretched out like the shadow of a tall pine at sunset. They passed the last outlying farmstead and the road began its gentle climb toward the mountains. The morning sun warmed their backs as Christine finally spoke. "I understand if you want to turn around," she said quietly. "Take me back to catch the next wagon west. I won't hold you to anything." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. The proper thing would be to do exactly that. Return her to town and write to the church agency demanding an explanation. But something held him back. Maybe it was the way she'd faced down the town's scorn with such quiet dignity. Maybe it was the mention of redemption, which spoke to his own deep yearning for grace. "Don't reckon that'd be very Christian of me," he said at last, turning away someone who came all this way in good faith. He saw her relax slightly from the corner of his eye. "Thank you," she whispered. The wagon rolled on, climbing steadily into the pine-scented air of the foothills. Ethan found himself stealing glances at his unexpected companion. Her face was lovely, yes, but it was the strength he saw there that caught at his heart. She sat straight-backed despite the rough road, her hands folded neatly in her lap. By mid-morning, they stopped to rest the horses at a clear stream. Ethan helped Christine down, noting how she moved carefully in her city boots on the rocky ground. She splashed cool water on her face while he checked the horse's harness, and he pretended not to notice her wiping away tears when she thought he wasn't looking. "It's a fair piece further to the cabin," he said as they prepared to move on. "Might get cold as we climb. There's a wool blanket behind the seat if you need it." Christine smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness, Mr. Hale." "Ethan," he said gruffly. "Reckon you should call me Ethan." The afternoon sun found them high in the mountains, the wagon following a narrow trail that wound between towering pines. Christine had wrapped herself in the offered blanket, but she showed no sign of complaint about the rough journey. Once, when they passed a particularly beautiful view of the valley below, Ethan heard her catch her breath in wonder. He found himself wanting to explain things to her, point out the hawks circling overhead, name the wild flowers that still bloomed in protected hollows, tell her about the elk that visited his meadow in the evenings. But the words stuck in his throat, trapped behind years of solitude and self-doubt. Instead, they continued in silence as the shadows lengthened across the trail. Ethan's mind churned with questions he didn't know how to ask. What had brought a woman like her to answer his advertisement? How could she face starting over in a place where her past would surely follow her? And most troubling of all, what would people think of him, taking in someone with her reputation? Yet every time his doubts threatened to overwhelm him, he remembered her words about redemption. Wasn't that what his own faith taught? That everyone deserved a chance at a new life, if they sought it honestly? The horses plodded steadily onward, their hooves raising small puffs of dust in the afternoon light. Ethan found himself praying silently, not for guidance anymore, but for strength. Strength to be kind when others were cruel. Strength to see past what everyone said to what might be true in God's eyes. Beside him, Christine sat quietly, her face turned toward the mountain vistas. Despite everything, despite the shock and shame of the morning, despite the long and uncomfortable journey, Ethan realized something unexpected was growing in his heart. Not just sympathy, but admiration for her courage. The wagon rolled on toward his mountain home, carrying them both into an uncertain future. But with each mile that passed, Ethan felt more certain that whatever happened next, turning this woman away would have been a grave mistake. Sometimes, he reflected, the Lord worked in ways that challenged everything you thought you knew about right and wrong. The afternoon sun slanted through the pines as they continued their journey, two lonely souls brought together by circumstance, each carrying their own hopes and fears toward whatever tomorrow might bring. The wagon lurched upward along the narrow mountain trail as evening approached. The wheels creaked and groaned over each rock and rut, making Christine grip the wooden seat tighter. Her knuckles had gone white hours ago, but she didn't complain. The steep drops along the trail's edge made her stomach flutter. Ethan noticed her discomfort but kept his eyes on the path ahead. The horses knew the way, picking their steps carefully as shadows lengthened across the mountainside. A cool wind whistled through the pines, carrying the sweet scent of evergreen and wild sage. "Never been this high up before," Christine finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. She adjusted her skirts, trying to find a more secure position on the hard seat. "Takes some getting used to," Ethan replied. He clicked softly to the horses as they approached another switchback. "Trail ain't so bad once you know it." Christine drew a deep breath, gathering her courage. The silence between them had grown heavy with unspoken questions. "Mr. Hale, Ethan, I need to tell you something." He waited, hands steady on the reins. "I left Leadville 3 months ago," she continued, her words coming faster now. "Left everything behind. The saloon, the life I was living." Her voice trembled. "I've been staying at the mission house in Denver, learning proper ways. When I saw your advertisement." She paused, twisting her hands in her lap. Ethan remained silent, but she could see the muscle working in his jaw. The wagon creaked onward. "I prayed about it," she said softly. "Prayed for a man who wouldn't, who might see past what I was." Shame and hope mingled in her voice. "The mission ladies said you had a good reputation, said you were God-fearing." The trail widened slightly as they reached a relatively flat stretch. Ethan pulled the horses to a stop, considering her words. Part of him wanted to believe her. The earnestness in her voice touched something in his heart, but he'd heard tales of clever women who could spin pretty stories. Still, there was something in the way she held herself, dignity wrapped around her like armor, that made him pause. "Getting dark," he said finally. "Best make camp here for the night." A small clearing opened up just off the trail, sheltered by towering pines. Ethan helped Christine down from the wagon, noting how she tried to hide her stiffness from the long ride. He busied himself with the horses while she stood uncertainly near the wagon. Would you like me to cook something?" she offered hesitantly. "I saw you have supplies in the wagon." Ethan glanced up, surprised. He'd half expected her to complain about sleeping rough. "There's beans and cornmeal," he said, cooking pots under the seat. Christine moved with quiet efficiency, gathering what she needed. Soon she had a small fire going. She'd clearly done this before, and the smell of cooking beans began to fill the clearing. She hummed softly as she worked, an old hymn that Ethan recognized from his childhood. The sun had fully set when they sat down to eat. Christine had managed to make a decent cornbread in the cast-iron skillet, and the beans were well seasoned with the salt pork she'd found among his supplies. They ate in silence as stars began to appear overhead. A coyote's howl echoed in the distance, making Christine start slightly. Another answered, closer this time. She drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "They won't come near," Ethan assured her. "Not with the fire." Christine nodded, staring into the flames. "When I saw your advertisement," she said suddenly, as if continuing their earlier conversation, "I knew it might be my only chance. The mission ladies weren't sure anyone would want me, with my past." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "I understand if you don't believe me. Most folks don't think someone like me can change, but I'm trying. Lord knows I'm trying." Ethan poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral upward. The honest pain in her voice struck deeper than any practiced speech could have. He'd seen that same hurt in his own mirror, the look of someone who felt unworthy of grace. "Ain't my place to judge," he said finally, The good book says we're all sinners in need of mercy. Christine's shoulders relaxed slightly at his words. She began gathering the cooking things, wiping them clean with a cloth she pulled from her carpet bag. Everything about her movements spoke of someone used to working, not the lazy creature town gossips had described. Ethan spread his bedroll near the fire, then pulled a spare blanket from the wagon for Christine. She arranged herself modestly on the other side of the flames, using her carpet bag as a pillow. The coyotes had moved on, leaving only the crack and pop of burning wood to break the night's silence. As Ethan lay looking up at the stars, he found himself offering a silent prayer of thanks. Not for the first time, he wondered at God's mysterious ways. He'd prayed for a wife who would understand loneliness, who would work beside him with a willing heart. Could it be that the Lord had answered that prayer in this unexpected way? Dawn came early in the mountains, painting the sky in delicate shades of pink and gold. They broke camp efficiently, neither wanting to delay the final leg of their journey. Christine had coffee ready before Ethan finished with the horses, and she'd managed to make a simple breakfast from the remaining cornbread. As they continued their climb, the morning sun warming their backs, Ethan's thoughts turned to Preacher Avery. The stern man had vouched for Ethan's character when he'd applied to the church's marriage agency. Would he stand behind Christine's desire for a fresh start, or would his rigid sense of propriety win out? The answer to that question became more pressing as they crested a ridge and heard the faint echo of church bells floating up from the settlement below. Sunday morning service would be starting soon. Ethan knew they'd have to face the preacher and the congregation's judgment before any vows could be spoken. Christine sat straighter as the bells reached them, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been reading my Bible every day," she said quietly, as if answering Ethan's unspoken concerns. "Learning the Psalms by heart." The mission ladies said it would help when times got hard. Ethan nodded, guiding the wagon carefully down the slope. He could see the church steeple now, a white finger pointing heavenward against the mountain backdrop. The sight had always brought him comfort before, but today it filled him with uncertainty. The horses sensed their nearness to town and picked up their pace slightly. Each step brought them closer to the moment of truth. Would the church accept Christine's claim of reformation? Would they stand behind her desire for a new life, or would scandal and suspicion win the day? Ethan glanced at the woman beside him, seeing the tension in her profile as she too watched the approaching steeple. Whatever happened next would test them both. His courage to stand against wagging tongues, her determination to prove herself changed. The weight of that knowledge settled over them like an early morning mist as they rolled steadily toward town and whatever judgment awaited. The midday sun cast sharp shadows through the church windows as Ethan and Christine approached the white clapboard building. Each step up the wooden stairs seemed to echo in the hushed anticipation. Ethan's calloused hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door handle, conscious of Christine's nervous presence behind him. Inside, the familiar scent of beeswax and pine welcomed them, but today it offered little comfort. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the town, their faces a mix of curiosity and judgment. Whispers rippled through the congregation like wind through prairie grass. "That's her, the Leadville woman. He's really going through with it. A harlot in our church?" Ethan drew himself up to his full height, though his heart hammered against his ribs. He'd never liked being the center of attention, but today he forced himself to stand straight, protecting Christine with his broad frame. She walked beside him with her head high, though he could sense her trembling. At the front of the church, Preacher Avery stood in his black coat conferring in low tones with 3 deacons. His stern face grew harder as he watched them approach, his disapproving gaze fixed particularly on Christine's scarlet traveling dress. "Brother Hale," the preacher said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "A word, if you please." Ethan squeezed Christine's hand gently before following Preacher Avery to the small antechamber beside the pulpit. The room smelled of old hymnals and dust, and felt smaller than ever with the 2 men inside. "This is most irregular," Preacher Avery began, his fingers working at his watch chain. "When I vouched for you with the marriage agency, I assumed they would send a respectable woman." He cleared his throat. "Your reputation in this community, Brother Hale, has always been beyond reproach. But this..." "She's changed," Ethan said quietly, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Been studying scripture at the Denver Mission House. Wants to start fresh. The preacher's face hardened. The leopard cannot change its spots, Brother Hale. Surely you understand what this means for your standing in the church. We cannot bless such a union. Think of the example it would set. Ethan felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders. His place in the church had been his anchor through years of loneliness. The thought of losing it made his throat tight. But then he remembered Christine's voice in the firelight, her quiet determination to prove herself worthy of grace. Before he could respond, a commotion erupted in the main chapel. The heavy church doors had burst open with a bang that made the windows rattle. Heavy bootsteps echoed on the wooden floor. Jedediah Crane strode down the center aisle like he owned it, his expensive boots gleaming, his vest adorned with a gold watch chain that caught the light. The cattle baron's presence seemed to fill the small church, and the whispers died away entirely. Sheriff Wilkes followed in his wake, looking uncomfortable but determined. Ethan emerged from the antechamber to find Christine frozen in place, her face drained of color. Her eyes were fixed on Crane with a look of such terror that Ethan's protective instincts flared immediately. Well, Crane drawled, coming to a stop near the altar. If it isn't my wayward investment. He reached into his vest and withdrew a folded document. Sheriff, would you care to explain the situation? Sheriff Wilkes cleared his throat, shooting an apologetic glance at Ethan. Mr. Crane here holds a legal contract. Says Miss Devlin is bound by debt to work in his establishments until such time as… Those contracts were forced, Christine burst out, her voice shaking but clear. He trapped girls with impossible terms, made us work off imaginary debts that only grew larger. Now, Crane cut her off smoothly. Everything was properly witnessed and signed. Sheriff? Wilkes nodded reluctantly. Papers appear to be in order. She's legally bound until the debt's paid. The congregation erupted in murmurs. Ethan saw several women draw back as if Christine's presence might taint them. Even some who had seemed sympathetic now avoided her eyes. He'll drag me back, Christine whispered, her fingers clutching at her skirts. Back to that life. Please. She broke off, choking back what might have been a sob. Ethan felt something shift inside him. The shy, uncertain man who'd always avoided conflict found himself stepping forward, placing himself between Christine and Crane. His voice, when it came, was quiet, but firm. The Lord says we're to protect the vulnerable, he said, addressing the congregation as much as Crane. Says we're to give shelter to those seeking refuge. The Lord also says to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, Preacher Avery interjected, though he looked uncomfortable. If there are legal obligations, legal don't always mean right, Ethan responded, surprising himself again. You taught us that yourself, preacher, speaking about slavery not 10 years past. A murmur ran through the church at this, several heads nodded, though others looked scandalized at the comparison. Crane's smooth facade cracked slightly, showing a flash of anger. This is business, nothing more. The woman owes a debt. Sheriff, do your duty. Sheriff Wilkes shifted his weight uncertainly, looking between Crane's cold confidence and Ethan's quiet determination. The badge on his chest caught the sunlight streaming through the windows, a reminder of responsibilities that should have been about justice, not power. Think careful, Sheriff, Ethan said softly, about which law you're serving. The tension in the church had grown thick enough to cut. Christine stood trembling but upright, her eyes moving between the faces around her. Crane's threatening presence, the sheriff's uncertainty, the preacher's stern disapproval, and Ethan's unexpected strength. Through the windows came the sound of meadowlarks singing, oblivious to the human drama unfolding inside. The simple beauty of their song seemed to highlight the ugliness of what was happening in God's house. I have the law on my side, Crane said, his voice hard now, and enough influence to make life very difficult for anyone who interferes. His gaze swept the congregation, letting the threat sink in. This woman is my property until her debt is paid. Those who aid her in evading that debt will face consequences. The word property seemed to echo in the sacred space. Ethan felt his hands curl into fists, though he kept them at his sides. Everything he'd been raised to believe, about justice, about protecting the weak, about standing up for what was right, crystallized in this moment. The choice before him was stark. He could step aside, preserve his standing in the church, avoid making an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory. Or he could stand firm, risk everything, and defend a woman society had already condemned. In the silence, Christine's soft voice carried clearly. I hoped a church would be a sanctuary. Those words, heavy with disappointment but not surprise, seemed to hang in the air. Ethan remembered her quiet determination to learn scripture, her willingness to work, her courage in facing judgment. He thought about grace, about second chances, about what it truly meant to follow Christ's example. His next words would determine not just his future, but Christine's chance at redemption. The congregation held its breath, watching to see which way this gentle giant would bend beneath the pressure of power and propriety. The church doors creaked open to the purple dusk, releasing a flood of whispering townsfolk into the cooling air. Ethan guided Christine through the crowd with a gentle hand at her elbow, his broad shoulders creating a shield between her and their prying eyes. The wagon waited where they'd left it, the horses stamping restlessly in the falling darkness. Harlot, someone hissed from the shadows. Another voice added, Crane'll get her back, mark my words. Ethan helped Christine onto the high wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. The reins felt rough and familiar in his calloused hands. Without a word, he snapped them once, and the horses moved forward, their hooves clopping against the packed dirt road. Behind them, the murmurs of the townspeople faded into the gathering night. They rode in silence until the last houses disappeared around a bend. The mountain road stretched ahead, climbing into darkness. Only then did Christine speak, her voice barely above a whisper. I need to tell you the truth about that contract. Her fingers twisted in her skirts. 3 years ago, I signed papers at Crane's Saloon in Lidville. Just for wages, mind you. I was desperate. Newly arrived from back east with no family, no money. She drew a shaky breath. But Crane, he added things after. Changed the terms. Suddenly there were room charges, costume fees, even charges for the water to wash with. The debt grew no matter how much we worked. Ethan listened, his jaw tight. The horses' steady pace carried them higher into the mountains, where the air grew thinner and cooler. Other girls tried to run, Christine continued. He brought them back in chains. Said the law was on his side. Her voice caught. I waited, saved every penny I could hide. When I saw your advertisement, she trailed off, then added softly, I won't go back to those chains, Mr. Hale. I'd sooner die free. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. You won't have to do either, he said, his quiet voice firm. No chains here. No master but the Lord. They pushed on through the darkness, the wagon swaying as it climbed steep switchbacks. Ethan knew these mountain trails like his own heartbeat, guiding the horses surely even when the moon slipped behind clouds. Christine held tight to the seat, unused to the pitch and sway of mountain travel. Near midnight, they crested a final ridge. Below, in a natural clearing, Ethan's homestead waited. The cabin's solid shape rose against the star-filled sky, its timber walls weathered to a silver gray. A split-rail fence enclosed a small pasture, and a chicken coop squatted near a lean-to barn. It ain't much, Ethan said as he helped her down from the wagon, but it's paid for, free and clear. He led the horses to the barn while Christine waited by the cabin door, her carpet bag clutched close. When he returned, he struck a match and lit a brass lamp, pushing open the heavy door. The cabin's single room spread before them, neat but spare. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth swept clean. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs stood beneath the window. Kitchen implements hung from pegs, and a rocking chair waited in the corner. Above, exposed beams supported a sleeping loft, accessed by a sturdy ladder. Ethan busied himself with the fireplace, his big hands arranging kindling and striking another match. Soon, warm light filled the room, pushing back the mountain cold. He moved with the careful precision of a man used to living alone, aware of his size in the confined space. The loft's mine, he said, not meeting her eyes. You can make up your bed here by the fire if you've a mind to. It's warmest there anyway. His cheeks reddened in the firelight. I'll fetch your trunk from the wagon. While he was gone, Christine stood in the center of the room, taking in every detail. The swept floor, the stack of firewood, the shelf with a well-worn Bible. Everything spoke of simple dignity, of a life lived honestly. Her fingers traced the rough-sawn table, feeling the care in its construction. Ethan returned with her trunk, setting it carefully against the wall. He pulled extra blankets from a chest and offered them awkwardly. "There's clean water in the bucket if you need it." And, he hesitated, "Welcome home, Miss Christine." Those simple words, spoken so plainly, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them back, managing a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Hale." He nodded, then climbed the ladder to his loft, his heavy boots making the rungs creak. Christine heard him moving above, then settle into what must be his bed. She changed quickly into her nightdress, then made up a pallet near the hearth. The blankets smelled of cedar and wood smoke. As she lay down, the fire's warmth wrapped around her like a blessing. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered into the quiet room, "for the first roof that asks nothing in return." The words fell soft as autumn leaves, meant for no ears but God's. Sleep came slowly, filled with half-waking dreams of pursuit and shelter. The fire settled with occasional pops and crackles. From the loft came Ethan's steady breathing, a reminder of safety in this strange new place. Dawn arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the busy scratching of chickens outside the cabin door. Christine woke to find the fire banked low, morning light streaming through the window. The smell of pine smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of fresh mountain air that seeped through the chinked logs. She dressed quickly in her plainest dress, then reached for her hairpins. As she worked her long hair into a simple twist, she heard Ethan descending the ladder. He paused at the sight of her, then mumbled a shy good morning before heading outside to tend to the stock. Christine's eyes fell on the broom in the corner. Without hesitation, she took it up and began to sweep, starting in the furthest corner and working her way toward the door. The simple rhythm of the task felt right, felt like belonging. This was no saloon to be worked in, but a home to be cared for. When Ethan returned with fresh milk and eggs, he found the cabin floor swept clean, the blankets folded, and Christine setting out plates on the table. She had tied a spare apron over her dress, her sleeves rolled up for work. Their eyes met across the morning bright room. Something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. She would earn her place here, not through contract or obligation, but through the quiet dignity of shared work and honest living. "There's coffee in the pot," she said softly, "if you've a mind for breakfast." Ethan nodded, setting down his morning's gathering. Outside, the mountain air carried the promise of another day, as fresh and clean as new-fallen snow. Inside, the simple domestic scene spoke of hope, of a new life taking root in fertile soil, growing toward the light of redemption. The danger wasn't past, they both knew that. Crane's threats hung over them like storm clouds on the horizon. But for now, in this mountain sanctuary, they had found a moment of peace, a chance to build something true and strong, founded on trust and mutual respect rather than bonds of paper and ink. Christine cracked eggs into the skillet and Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee. The morning sun streamed through the window, turning the simple cabin into a cathedral of new beginnings. Dawn painted the mountain peaks gold as Christine stirred the cook fire to life. Her hands moved with growing confidence as she laid strips of bacon in the cast-iron skillet, the familiar sizzle and smoky aroma filling the cabin. The rhythm of morning chores felt natural now, like a dance she'd always known but forgotten. Ethan descended from his loft, boots creaking on the ladder rungs. He paused, surprise flickering across his weathered face at the sight of fresh biscuits cooling on the table. "Ain't used to breakfast being ready," he said softly, settling into his chair. Christine smiled, sliding bacon onto their tin plates. "Well, Mr. Hale, best get used to it. A body needs proper fuel for working." After breakfast, she watched through the window as Ethan attacked the woodpile, his powerful shoulders swinging the axe in steady arcs. The October air carried a bite, warning of winter's approach. Christine gathered eggs from the henhouse, speaking gentle nonsense to the clucking birds. One hen, bolder than the rest, pecked grain from her palm. Inside, she discovered Ethan's spare flannel shirt hanging from a peg, its sleeve torn at the elbow. Without comment, She retrieved her sewing basket and settled by the window. The neat stitches brought memories of her mother, teaching her to mend by firelight long ago before hard times drove them west. Ethan came in for his midday meal and stopped short at the sight of his repaired shirt. He lifted it carefully, examining the nearly invisible seam. "Thank you," he mumbled, cheeks reddening. "Ain't had anyone to do such things since Ma passed." "It's no trouble," Christine replied, busying herself with lunch preparation to hide her own blush. Their suppers became quiet sanctuaries as autumn deepened. Lamplight cast warm shadows as they shared bowls of beans and cornbread. Conversation came haltingly at first, like winter creeks testing spring thaws. Ethan spoke of his hopes for the homestead. A bigger barn come spring, maybe some cattle if the Lord willing. Christine described her dreams of a kitchen garden, herbs for medicine and flowers for beauty. But their growing peace couldn't keep the outside world at bay forever. When Ethan rode down to the settlement for supplies 4 days later, he felt the change immediately. Conversations died as he passed. Women hurried their children to the other side of the street. Inside the general store, the owner's wife pointedly ignored his greeting, sliding his purchases across the counter without meeting his eyes. Outside, a group of boys stopped their game to stare. "That's him," one whispered loudly, "the one who married the fancy lady." Laughter followed, sharp as winter wind. "My pa says she's a fallen woman. My ma says she'll bring God's judgment on us all." Ethan's hands tightened on his horse's reins, but he kept his face still. Dignity, he reminded himself, was the only shield against such barbs. The worst blow came when Preacher Avery cornered him outside the livery stable. The older man's face was stern with righteous anger. "Brother Hale," he began, voice carrying to ensure others would hear, "I must warn you. You've yoked yourself to sin. That woman carries corruption in her very nature. The congregation fears her influence will spread like poison through our godly community." Ethan felt heat rise in his chest. "She's trying to make a new life, preacher. Ain't that what the good book teaches? Redemption for all who seek it?" "Some stains run too deep for cleansing," Avery replied coldly. "I've sent word to every church in 3 counties. No Christian congregation will bless such a union." The ride home seemed longer than usual, each step of his horse carrying the weight of the town's condemnation. When he reached the cabin, Christine was hanging wash on the line, her hair glowing copper in the afternoon sun. She turned at his approach and her smile faded at his expression. "They're talking, aren't they?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded, unable to soften the truth. "The whole town's got opinions to share." Christine lifted her chin, but he saw the hurt in her eyes. "Well, let them talk. We know what's true." That evening, after Ethan retired to his loft, he heard muffled sounds from below. Christine was weeping, trying to stifle the sound in her pillow. His heart ached, but he remained still, respecting her privacy in grief. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. They dressed in their best clothes, Ethan in his one good suit, Christine in a modest brown dress she'd sewn herself. The wagon ride to town was silent, both steeling themselves for what lay ahead. The little white church stood bright against the mountain backdrop, its steeple reaching toward heaven. Other families were already gathering, their wagons and buggies crowding the yard. All activity ceased as Ethan helped Christine down from their wagon. They climbed the steps together, heads high, but before they could reach the door, Preacher Avery stepped forward, blocking their path. His face was set in stern lines. "This is God's house," he declared loudly. "We cannot allow its sanctity to be polluted. No blessing will be given here to those who choose to wallow in sin." The congregation watched, some with satisfaction, others with discomfort, but none spoke in their defense. Christine's hand trembled in Ethan's grasp. For a moment, Ethan considered arguing, quoting scripture about mercy and forgiveness, but he looked at Christine's pale face and made a different choice. Without a word, he squeezed her hand and turned away, leading her back to their wagon. The ride home was heavy with unspoken pain. Christine sat straight-backed, her eyes fixed forward, but tears traced silent paths down her cheeks. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the cabin floor, Christine sat in the rocking chair by the fire. Her fingers worked at her mending, but her mind seemed far away. Then, soft as a mountain breeze, she began to hum. The tune was an old hymn, one Ethan recognized from his own childhood. Amazing Grace. Her voice grew stronger, though it trembled with emotion. The simple melody filled the cabin with something pure and true, rising like prayer smoke through the rafters. Ethan sat perfectly still in his chair, afraid to break the spell. When the last note faded, Christine wiped her eyes with her apron. "My mama taught me that song," she said softly. "Said grace finds us all, if we're willing to receive it." Ethan watched the firelight play across her face, seeing not the woman the town condemned, but someone brave enough to believe in second chances. His heart softened like spring earth after winter's frost, ready at last for new growth. "Reckon your mama was right," he replied, his deep voice gentle in the gathering dark. Outside, the mountain night wrapped around their cabin like a blanket. Inside, two souls found comfort in shared exile, their faith tested but unbroken. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, they had found a measure of peace in their own small sanctuary. A week of mountain autumn painted the aspens gold against the evergreens. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Ethan's cabin yard as he trudged up the path, a fresh-killed deer across his shoulders. His boots crunched on fallen leaves, and the familiar scent of wood smoke drew him homeward. But something else drifted through the crisp air. Children's voices, mixing with Christine's gentle laughter. Ethan paused, adjusting his burden. Through the cabin window, lamplight glowed warm and welcoming despite the early hour. He hung the deer on the butchering post and wiped his hands on his buckskins before approaching the door. The scene inside stopped him in his tracks. Christine sat at their rough-hewn table, surrounded by 3 young children. Little Sarah Talbot, no more than 7, pointed at letters scratched on a slate while her younger brothers Tommy and James watched with wide eyes. Their mother, Mrs. Talbot, stood by the hearth, stirring something that smelled like apple butter. "That's right, Sarah," Christine was saying, her voice warm with pride. "And what sound does it make with the next letter?" Sarah sounded out carefully. "Thread. Like Mama uses. Clever girl." Christine's face glowed with genuine joy. She looked up as Ethan entered, her smile deepening. "Welcome home. The Talbots brought us some windfall apples, so Mrs. Talbot's teaching me to make proper apple butter." Mrs. Talbot turned from the hearth, her kind face flushed from the heat. "Least I could do, Mr. Hale, after all your Christine's done. She's got a real gift with the little ones. Been teaching them their letters and numbers every other afternoon this week while I tend to the washing." Ethan's chest swelled with unexpected pride at the words, "Your Christine." He watched as she helped Tommy trace letters with a stubby piece of chalk, her patience never wavering despite his clumsy attempts. "Much obliged, Mrs. Talbot," he managed, still taking in the transformed atmosphere of his once lonely cabin. "Looks like you've brought some life to these old walls." "Oh, it's Christine we're obliged to," Mrs. Talbot insisted. "Not many would take time with other folks' children, especially with all the unkind talk in town." She lowered her voice. "I'll tell you true. I had my doubts at first, hearing the gossip. But I've watched her with my young ones. There's genuine goodness there, plain as day." Ethan nodded, emotion tightening his throat as he watched Christine press a praise penny into Sarah's small palm for reading a full sentence. The copper caught the lamplight like a promise. The peaceful rhythm of their days continued until 3 mornings later, hoofbeats approached the cabin. Ethan stepped outside, hand near his belt, then relaxed as he recognized the rider. "Henry," he called out, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Been too long, friend." The Apache scout dismounted with fluid grace, his dark eyes taking in the cabin's changes. New curtains in the windows, herbs drying under the eaves, a neat woodpile stacked against winter's coming. He gripped Ethan's offered hand in the warm clasp of old allies. "The mountain air agrees with you, brother," Henry said, his English clear but carefully chosen. "You seem less hollow than when we last hunted together." Ethan ducked his head, remembering that desperate time 2 years past when Henry had found him half frozen in a late spring storm. The scout had not only saved his life, but shared his food and wisdom during the long trek back to safety. The cabin door opened and Christine stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. She moved to stand beside Ethan, neither hiding nor pushing herself forward. Henry studied her with quiet intensity, then inclined his head in greeting. "The spirits often send us down unexpected trails to find our true path." Christine's eyes widened at this respectful welcome, so different from the town's scorn. "You must be Henry. Ethan's told me how you saved him in the high country." She gestured toward the cabin. "Would you share our noon meal? I've venison stew simmering." Over bowls of fragrant stew, Christine's natural curiosity emerged. She asked Henry about his people's songs, especially their healing chants. Far from taking offense, Henry nodded approvingly at her genuine interest. "Music speaks to the heart past all barriers," he said. "My grandmother taught that a song carried in faith can mend both body and spirit." "That's what I've found with the children," Christine admitted. "Even the most restless little ones settle when we sing together." She glanced at Ethan. "I've been teaching them hymns in the evenings. Amazing Grace is their favorite." Henry's dark eyes crinkled. "Ah yes, I have heard this one. The words speak truth. Amazing grace that saves the lost." He looked pointedly at both Ethan and Christine. Some would say a mountain man and a woman seeking new life are both lost, but perhaps they are simply finding their way home. After Henry rode out, promising to return when the snow flew, Ethan noticed a new lightness in Christine's step. That evening, the cabin filled again with children's voices. Not just the Talbot youngsters now, but two more from the Peterson homestead, and even young Will Carter, whose mother had died of fever that spring. They sat in a rough circle, some on chairs, others on the floor, while Christine led them through "Jesus Loves Me." Her clear voice guided their eager attempts, patient with missed notes and forgotten words. Between songs, she helped them sound out Bible verses, turning the learning into a game. Word spread through the scattered homesteads. Christine was teaching orphans and farmers' children not just hymns, but reading and figures too. No payment asked, only the joy of small voices raised in song. Mrs. Peterson brought eggs and butter one morning. "It's a blessing," she told Ethan as he helped her down from her wagon. "My Jenny never took to learning till your Christine made it sing for her." Even Mr. Carter, a hard man since losing his wife, softened when he came to collect Will one evening. The boy was proudly showing off a Bible verse he'd copied all by himself. "Never thought I'd see the day," he muttered, rough voice suspiciously thick. His mama would have been proud. Ethan watched it all with quiet amazement. His cabin, once as silent as the surrounding pines, now rang with laughter and prayer. Children's boots tracked mud on his floors, small fingers left smudges on his windows, and he found he didn't mind at all. More than that, he watched Christine bloom like a wild rose after rain. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes began to fade. She walked taller, smiled easier, found her place in this mountain sanctuary they were building together. Yet sometimes when the children had gone home and evening pressed dark against the windows, Ethan caught her staring into the shadows. He knew she was thinking of Crane, that corrupted contract, the threat of being dragged back to a life she'd fought so hard to leave behind. One night after the last student had been collected, Christine stood at the window, arms wrapped tight around herself. The moon cast her face in silver and shadow. "They're good people," she said softly. "Despite everything they'd heard about me, they're starting to see past it. To trust me with their precious children." She turned to Ethan, moonlight catching the tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd have such a gift. Such a chance to do right." Ethan moved to stand beside her, his large frame blocking the chill from the window. "You're building something fine here," he said simply. "Something true." Christine leaned slightly toward him, not quite touching. "I keep thinking about what Henry said, about finding our way home." She drew a shaky breath. "I want this to be home, Ethan. More than I've ever wanted anything, but Crane." "Crane won't touch you," Ethan promised, his quiet voice carrying the weight of mountain stone. "What you're doing here, teaching these young ones, bringing light to this cabin, that's God's work, and I aim to see you keep doing it." She looked up at him then, hope and fear mingled in her gaze. The moonlight painted them both in silver, a man and woman standing together against the gathering dark, while somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called its evening song. Frost painted delicate patterns on the cabin windows as December settled into the mountains. The mornings dawned brittle and bright, smoke rising straight from the chimney into the crystal air. Inside, Christine wrapped herself in the thick shawl Ethan had traded for, preparing baskets of goods for their trip to town. "The eggs are still warm," she said, tucking straw carefully around them, "and this venison's the finest cut from your last hunt." Her fingers, roughened now from honest work, moved surely as she packed their wares. Ethan nodded, watching her from where he hitched the horses to the wagon. The early light caught the silver threading through her dark hair, and something tugged in his chest. These quiet morning moments had become precious to him, though he struggled to find words to say so. The wagon creaked as they made their way down the mountain trail. Christine held the egg basket steady in her lap, humming softly. It was a hymn the children had been practicing, and Ethan found himself humming along, surprising them both into shy smiles. Town appeared through the trees, smoke rising from scattered chimneys. Ethan felt Christine straighten beside him, squaring her shoulders. No matter how many times they made this journey, the weight of judgment weighted in the settlement's narrow streets. At the mercantile, Mrs. Green's lips pinched tight as they entered, though she said nothing. Other customers drew back slightly, mothers pulling children closer. Christine kept her chin high, arranging their goods on the counter with quiet dignity. "Fine eggs you have there," Mrs. Green admitted grudgingly, checking each one. "And the venison looks clean-cut." "Much obliged," Ethan replied, his deep voice steady. He had learned to weather the town's cool reception, drawing strength from Christine's example of grace under scorn. Sudden shouts from the street shattered the tense quiet. "Help! Somebody help!" They rushed outside to find Mrs. Talbot half carrying, half dragging her young son Tommy. The boy's face blazed red with fever, his small body limp as a rag doll. "He just fell over," Mrs. Talbot cried, her voice raw with fear. "He was fine this morning, just a little warm, and then—" "The doctor," someone called. "Where's Dr. Morrison?" "Gone to the mining camp," came the reply. "Won't be back for days." Tommy's breathing came in harsh gasps. Mrs. Talbot swayed, nearly dropping him as panic spread through the gathering crowd. Christine moved forward, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Get him inside, quick. He's burning up." She turned to the nearest onlooker. "Fetch clean water and set it to boil, now." Something in her tone sparked action. Men and women who moments ago had shunned her now jumped to obey. Ethan watched in amazement as Christine took charge, directing people with calm authority. They carried Tommy into Mrs. Talbot's cabin. Christine stripped off her shawl, rolling up her sleeves. "Blankets," she ordered. "All you have. And someone bring willow bark if you've got it." Hour after hour she worked tirelessly. Her hands never stopped moving, bathing Tommy's hot face, checking his pulse, wringing out cool cloths. When the boy thrashed in delirium, she gathered him close, humming low and sweet until he settled. Ethan split and stacked firewood until his arms ached, keeping the stove fed. Each time he entered, he found Christine still at her post, speaking soft encouragement to both Tommy and his mother. As evening deepened into night, more neighbors arrived with supplies: broth, fresh water, clean linens. They moved quietly, watching Christine with growing respect as she continued her gentle battle against the fever. "How do you know what to do?" Mrs. Talbot whispered, clutching Tommy's small hand. Christine's eyes never left the boy's face as she answered. "I learned nursing in the saloons. So many sick miners, no doctors for miles. You either learned or watched good men die." She dipped another cloth in cool water. "But I also remembered how my mama tended us when fever came. She'd sing and storytell through the worst nights, said it gave us something to hold on to." Near midnight, Tommy's fever raged highest. Christine never faltered, though exhaustion lined her face. She sang every hymn the children had learned, her voice growing hoarse but never stopping. Ethan's heart swelled watching her. This woman society had condemned showing more Christian charity than many who wore their virtue like medals. The hours crawled past. Mrs. Talbot dozed fitfully in her chair while neighbors took turns bringing fresh water and stoking the fire. Ethan noticed how they spoke differently to Christine now, with quiet respect instead of barely concealed disdain. Just before dawn, Tommy's breathing changed. Christine leaned forward, touching his forehead. "The fever's breaking," she announced, relief bright in her tired eyes. Mrs. Talbot jerked awake. "Truly? Feel for yourself." His skin's cooling and his sleep's easier now. Tommy stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Mama?" Mrs. Talbot burst into tears, gathering her son close. Then she reached for Christine's hands, clasping them tight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my boy." Word spread quickly through the settlement. People who had crossed the street to avoid Christine now stopped to offer thanks. Even Mrs. Green from the mercantile appeared with a basket of fresh bread and preserves. "For them as watched over Tommy," she said gruffly, not quite meeting Christine's eyes. "It was good work you did." The sun climbed high before Ethan and Christine finally started home. She sat quiet beside him, hands folded in her lap. As they left town behind, he heard her soft weeping. "What's wrong?" he asked, worry sharp in his chest. "Nothing's wrong," she replied, wiping her eyes. "It's just all my life I wanted to do something truly good, something useful. In the saloons I tried to help where I could, but it never felt like enough." She drew a shaky breath. "Last night, watching that fever break, seeing Tommy open his eyes, I felt God's purpose clear as sunrise." Ethan guided the horses around a bend, considering his words carefully. "I prayed so long for a godly woman," he admitted. "Someone to help build a Christian home. Never thought the Lord would answer by sending me a woman who teaches children hymns and saves their lives too." He glanced at her, shy but certain. "Reckon his ways ain't always what we expect." Christine's answering smile was like spring after winter. They rode on toward home, the morning sun warming their backs, while behind them the settlement buzzed with a new story. Not of a fallen woman, but of a healer whose hands worked mercy in the darkest hours. The morning dawned white and hushed. Snow had fallen through the night, transforming the mountain into a pristine wilderness. Ethan stood at the cabin door, marveling at how the drifts sparkled like scattered diamonds in the early light. "Looks like we'll need more firewood," he called over his shoulder to Christine, who was stirring the morning's porridge. She came to stand beside him, her shawl pulled tight. "I'll help. 2 sets of hands work faster than 1. Ethan glanced down at her, surprised. "It's mighty cold out there." "I'm stronger than I look," she replied, a smile playing at her lips. "And I reckon I've learned a thing or two about mountain life these past weeks." The air bit sharp and clean as they made their way to the woodpile. Ethan demonstrated how to split the logs, his powerful arms swinging the axe in smooth arcs. Christine watched carefully, then took up the smaller hatchet he offered. Her first few swings went wild, drawing a chuckle from Ethan. "Here now," he said, moving to guide her hands. "Like this. Let the weight of the blade do the work." They worked side by side, their breath clouding in the frigid air. Christine's cheeks grew rosy with effort, but her strikes grew more sure. When she successfully split a particularly knotted piece, she let out a whoop of triumph that startled a pair of snow-dusted sparrows from a nearby pine. "Did you see that?" she exclaimed, grinning up at Ethan. He nodded, his own smile warming his weathered face. "You're a natural, Miss Christine." "Just Christine," she corrected gently. "After all we've been through, seems silly to stand on ceremony." Ethan ducked his head, pleased but shy at the ease growing between them. He bent to gather an armload of split wood, only to stumble in a hidden drift. Arms pinwheeling, he went down with a soft whoomp into the snow. Christine's laughter rang out clear as sleigh bells. "Oh, are you all right?" "Fine as cream gravy," he answered, trying to maintain dignity while covered in snow. "Though I reckon these drifts are deeper than they look." She extended a hand to help him up, but her boot slipped on the icy ground. Down she went beside him, sending up a puff of snow. For a moment, they just looked at each other, surprise written on both faces. Then Christine started giggling and Ethan found himself joining in, their shared mirth echoing off the mountainside. "Lord above," Christine gasped, wiping tears of laughter from her eyes. "What a pair of graceful creatures we are." "Regular dancing bears," Ethan agreed, helping her to her feet. They gathered the scattered wood, still chuckling, and made their way back to the cabin. The morning passed in comfortable industry, banking the fire, hanging wet clothes to dry, preparing a hearty stew for the evening meal. As dusk approached, they sat before the crackling hearth, bowls of steaming stew warming their hands. The cabin glowed golden in the lamplight, and outside the snow continued to fall in gentle waves. "Tell me about your winters here," Christine said softly. "Before I came." Ethan stirred his stew, considering. "Mighty quiet, mostly. Lots of long nights with just my Bible for company. Sometimes the silence would press so hard I'd catch myself talking to the fire just to hear a human voice." He paused, embarrassed at the admission. "I understand loneliness," Christine replied. Even in a crowded saloon, you can feel more alone than a cloud in an empty sky. She set her bowl aside, drawing her knees up to her chest. When I was little, before everything changed, my mama and I used to sit just like this on winter nights. She'd tell stories while she mended, and I'd string dried apple slices for Christmas decorations. What happened to her? Ethan asked gently. Fever took her when I was 12. Papa had already passed in a mining accident, so I went to live with my aunt. Christine's voice grew distant. She meant well, but times were hard. When the saloon owner offered me work as a serving girl, it seemed like providence. I didn't understand then what it would lead to. Ethan's heart ached at the sadness in her voice. You were just a child. God's grace can make new paths, she whispered. I believe that now, even if... A heavy pounding at the door cut through her words. Ethan rose quickly, warning Christine back with a gesture. The pounding came again, accompanied by a sharp voice. Open up, Hale! Sheriff's business. Ethan's stomach clenched as he opened the door. Sheriff Wilkes stood there, snow dusting his shoulders. Behind him loomed Jedediah Crane, his expensive coat stark against the white night. Evening, gentlemen, Ethan said carefully. What brings you up the mountain in this weather? They pushed past him into the cabin's warmth. Christine shrank back against the far wall, her face gone pale as milk. Crane's eyes fixed on her with predatory satisfaction. Official business, the sheriff announced, producing a sheaf of papers from inside his coat. Regarding the matter of contractual obligations. What obligations? Ethan demanded, moving to stand between them and Christine. Crane's voice oozed like rancid honey. Why, the binding agreement Miss Devlin signed with my establishment in Leadville, 3 years' worth of room, board, and advance wages, all properly documented and witnessed. That contract was a lie, Christine cried. You changed the terms after I signed, made it impossible to ever pay off the debt. Now, Crane smiled, showing too many teeth. The law's the law. Sheriff Wilkes here has reviewed the papers himself. Haven't you, Sheriff? The lawman shifted uncomfortably, but nodded. Documents appear legal and binding. Miss Devlin remains Mr. Crane's employee until such time as her debts are settled. Employee? Ethan's voice thundered in the small space. You mean his prisoner? This isn't justice, it's slavery. Watch yourself, Hale, the sheriff warned. That's dangerous talk. I've got authority to jail any man who interferes with legal contracts. No. Christine stumbled forward, tears streaming down her face. Please, I'll go. Don't hurt him because of me. She sagged against the rough-hewn table, shoulders shaking with sobs. I was a fool to think I could escape. All I've done is bring trouble to a good man's door. Crane's satisfaction filled the cabin like a foul smell. I'll return within 3 days to collect what's mine. Try to leave before then, and I'll have the sheriff arrest you both. He adjusted his expensive coat. Come along, Wilkes. Our business here is done. They strode out into the snowy night, leaving the door hanging open. Cold air rushed in, but Ethan barely noticed. He crossed to where Christine wept, gathering her gently in his arms. Listen to me, he said fiercely. You're not going back to him. I won't allow it. How can you stop it? She whispered brokenly. He has the law on his side. He'll throw you in jail, take your land, everything you've worked for. I won't be the cause of your ruin. The only ruin would be letting that snake win. Ethan's voice grew tender. You've brought more blessing to this cabin than trouble. Those children you teach, the life you saved, that's God's work, plain as sunrise. And I aim to protect it. Christine lifted her tear-stained face. But how? I don't know yet, he admitted, but I'll find a way. I swear it. He held her close as she cried herself out, the fire burning low on the hearth. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, while inside 2 hearts beat with equal measures of fear and determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The cabin that had glowed with such contentment mere hours before now felt shadowed by Crane's threats. Yet as Ethan stroked Christine's hair, murmuring prayers of comfort, he felt steel entering his soul. He had let the world's judgment rule him too long. Now with love and justice at stake, it was time to stand and fight. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountain homestead. Ethan stood by the cabin door, adjusting his coat while Christine wrapped a warm scarf around his neck. "Be careful," she whispered, her fingers trembling slightly. "Crane has friends everywhere." "I aim to see Judge Albright," Ethan replied, his voice steady despite the worry in his heart. "He's known for being fair-minded, even when dealing with powerful men." The morning sun caught the frost on Christine's eyelashes as she looked up at him. "I'll pray while you're gone. It seems that's all I can do now." "Prayer's more powerful than any man's schemes," Ethan said softly. He squeezed her hand once, then mounted his horse and headed down the snow-covered trail toward town. The ride gave him time to think, to wrestle with his doubts. The steady crunch of hooves through snow marked time like a metronome as he rehearsed what he would say to the judge. By mid-morning, he reached the settlement, tying his horse outside the courthouse, a sturdy building that spoke of law's permanence even in these wild territories. Inside, he found Judge Albright in his office, surrounded by leather-bound law books and stacks of documents. The judge was a tall man with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen 40 years of frontier justice. He looked up as Ethan entered, gesturing to a chair. "Mr. Hale," the judge said, his voice as weathered as old leather. "I've heard talk about your situation." "Yes, sir." Ethan removed his hat, holding it respectfully. "I've come about Jedediah Crane's claim on Miss Devlin." The judge leaned back, studying Ethan's face. "Serious matter that. Contract law isn't simple, especially when it involves saloon obligations." "The contract's false," Ethan said firmly. "Changed after she signed it, or so she claims. Crane's using it to keep her in bondage." Judge Albright's eyes narrowed. "Those are grave accusations against a prominent citizen. Do you have proof?" "Not yet, sir. But I know men who've seen Crane's methods, the Apache scout Henry for one. He's witnessed Crane's dealings at the saloon." The judge picked up a pen, making a note. Henry's testimony would carry weight. He's known for honest speech. He fixed Ethan with a penetrating stare. "But you should understand, Crane's influence runs deep in these parts. He has friends in the territorial capital, connections with the mining companies." "I understand, sir," Ethan replied. "But truth needs to stand against influence, or what's law worth?" A ghost of a smile touched the judge's stern face. "Well said." He considered for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. We'll hold a hearing, day after tomorrow, in the church since the courthouse is under repair. Both sides will present their evidence, and I'll render judgment according to law." "Thank you, sir." Ethan stood, relief and anxiety warring in his chest. "Don't thank me yet," the judge warned. "Justice is blind, Mr. Hale. If Crane's contract proves valid, I'll have to uphold it, no matter my personal feelings." Ethan nodded gravely and took his leave, the weight of the coming battle heavy on his shoulders. Back at the homestead, Christine knelt before the hearth, her prayers mixing with the crackling of the fire. The morning's chores were done, chickens fed, breakfast dishes washed, floors swept. But she couldn't find peace in the routine. Her thoughts kept circling back to the damage she'd brought to Ethan's life. "Lord," she whispered, "I know I don't deserve your mercy, but please don't let my past destroy this good man's future." A knock at the door startled her from her prayers. Her heart jumped. Was it Crane, coming early to claim her? But when she opened the door, she found Henry standing there, his dark eyes kind beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "May I enter?" he asked formally. "Of course," Christine stepped back, grateful for the company of a friend. "Please, come warm yourself by the fire." Henry moved with quiet grace to the hearth, warming his hands. "I heard about Crane's visit last night," he said without preamble. "He is like the coyote, always hunting the weak." "I'm afraid he'll win," Christine admitted, sinking into a chair. "He has so much power, and I'm just—" She trailed off, unable to voice her shame. "You are stronger than you know," Henry said firmly. "I have seen Crane's ways at the saloon. How he changes papers, makes promises that turn to chains." He turned to face her fully. "I will speak of what I have seen. My people value truth-telling above all. The judge will hear." Christine's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that, even knowing Crane might seek revenge?" Henry's smile was fierce and proud. "Crane does not frighten me. My people have faced worse than him and survived. Besides," he added more gently, "you have shown kindness to the children, respect for our ways. Such things matter more than old papers." His words filled Christine with new strength. She had been so focused on her unworthiness that she'd forgotten the good she'd tried to do since coming to the mountain. Perhaps that counted for something in God's eyes, if not in Crane's. They talked through the afternoon, Henry sharing stories of his people's justice traditions, Christine listening and learning. As the sun began to set, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Ethan returned, his face weary but determined. "The judge will hear us," he announced as he came through the door, "day after tomorrow in the church." He noticed Henry and nodded respectfully. "Good to see you, friend." "I will speak at the hearing," Henry said simply, "about Crane's true nature." Ethan's eyes lit with hope. That could make all the difference. He turned to Christine. "The judge seems fair-minded. If we can prove the contract was changed." "Then I might truly be free," Christine whispered. She rose and crossed to Ethan, taking his rough hands in hers. "Whatever happens, I want you to know. These weeks here have been the first honest happiness I've known in years." Henry quietly took his leave, sensing the private moment. Outside, snow began to fall again, rattling against the cabin windows like tiny fingers tapping glass. But inside, the fire blazed warm and bright, matching the hope that had begun to kindle in their hearts. Ethan and Christine stood together by the hearth, hands clasped, neither speaking for a long moment. The coming days would test their courage, their faith, their trust in justice. But for now, they drew strength from each other's presence, from the simple truth that they no longer faced their battles alone. "We should rest," Ethan said finally. "Tomorrow we'll need to prepare for the hearing." Christine nodded, squeezing his hands once before letting go. As she made up her bed by the fire, she felt calmer than she had since Crane's visit. Whatever happened at the hearing, she would face it with dignity. She had found something worth fighting for, not just her freedom, but the chance to live an honest life, to be worthy of the trust Ethan and Henry had placed in her. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside their faith burned brighter than fear. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, they had hope. And sometimes, hope was enough to light the way through the darkest night. Dawn crept over the mountains in shades of slate and iron, painting the snow-covered church in muted tones. Wagon wheels crunched through fresh powder as townspeople arrived, their breaths forming clouds in the frigid morning air. The small churchyard filled quickly, horses stamping and snorting as they were hitched to posts. Ethan helped Christine down from their wagon, his large hand steady at her elbow. She wore her best dress, a modest brown wool with a high collar, and had plaited her hair simply. Gone was any trace of the scarlet woman who had first stepped down from the Denver wagon. In her eyes, though, flickered both fear and determination. "Remember," Ethan whispered as they approached the church steps, "you ain't alone in this fight." Christine squeezed his hand in response, her fingers ice-cold despite her woolen gloves. Together, they climbed the steps and entered the transformed church. The interior had been rearranged to serve as a makeshift courtroom. The pulpit now stood as the judge's bench, while the first few rows of pews had been turned to face each other, creating an aisle down the middle. Townsfolk packed the remaining seats, their whispers echoing off the high wooden ceiling. At the front, Jedediah Crane held court with his lawyer, spreading papers across a small table with deliberate showmanship. His silver watch chain gleamed as he moved, and his tailored suit spoke of wealth and influence. When he caught sight of Christine, his thin lips curved in a predatory smile. Sheriff Wilkes stood near Crane's table, thumbs hooked in his gun belt, nodding along to whatever the cattle baron was saying. His badge caught the weak light filtering through the church's windows, a reminder of how law could be twisted to serve power. Ethan led Christine to sit at the small table opposite Crane's. They had no lawyer, none in town would stand against the cattle baron. But they had truth on their side, and Henry's testimony to come. The murmuring grew as more people filed in. Mrs. Talbot slipped into a pew near them, offering Christine a small smile of encouragement. Her son, the boy Christine had nursed through fever, waved shyly from beside his mother. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Albright entered through the side door, his black robes sweeping behind him. The sheriff called out, "All rise," and the assembled crowd stood as one. The judge took his place behind the pulpit, his stern face surveying the packed church. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice carrying to every corner. This hearing will come to order." Christine's hands trembled in her lap. Ethan covered them with his own broad palm, lending her his strength. "We are here," Judge Albright continued, "to determine the validity of a contract between Jedediah Crane and Christine Devlin. Mr. Crane claims Miss Devlin is bound by debt and written agreement to work in his establishment until such debts are paid. Mr. Crane, you may present your case." Crane's lawyer rose, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a superior air. "Your Honor, I hold here a legally binding contract, signed by Miss Devlin herself, acknowledging a debt of $2,000 for room, board, and advance wages at the Silver Dollar Saloon in Leadville. The terms clearly state that this debt must be repaid through continued employment at Mr. Crane's establishments." He began reading from the document, his nasal voice carrying through the hushed church. "The undersigned agrees to work exclusively for Jedediah Crane until such time as all debts are fully paid, with interest accruing at 15% per month." Gasps rippled through the crowd as the exploitative terms were revealed. Christine swayed in her seat, color draining from her face. The interest rate alone meant she would never be free. Each month's charges would exceed any wages she could earn. Ethan's arm went around her shoulders, steadying her. "Breathe easy," he whispered. "Henry's coming. We ain't beaten yet." The lawyer continued reading, laying out clause after clause designed to trap and bind. When he finished, he placed the contract before Judge Albright with a flourish. "As you can see, Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of contract law. Miss Devlin accepted the terms, received the money, and now seeks to escape her obligations. We demand she be returned to fulfill her contract, with damages paid for time lost." Crane smirked from his seat, already certain of victory. The sheriff nodded along, while townsfolk muttered amongst themselves. Judge Albright examined the contract carefully, then looked up. "Does Miss Devlin wish to respond to these claims?" Before Christine could speak, the church door opened. Henry entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. He wore clean buckskins and carried himself with quiet dignity as he walked down the aisle. "Your Honor," Ethan stood, "we call Henry as a witness to Mr. Crane's business practices." Crane's face darkened. "I object to allowing an Indian to testify? What can he know of proper contracts?" "Henry is a respected scout who has assisted the Army and this court before," Judge Albright replied sharply. "His testimony will be heard." He gestured for Henry to approach. "Please tell us what you have witnessed regarding Mr. Crane's dealings at the Silver Dollar Saloon." Henry faced the judge, his voice clear and measured. "I have seen Crane change papers after they are signed. He takes contracts from girls when they are desperate or drunk, then adds new words. I have watched him forge marks of women who cannot write, claiming they agreed to terms they never heard." Crane leaped to his feet. "Lies, all lies," he cursed, face mottled with rage. "Your Honor, you cannot accept such baseless accusations." "I speak truth," Henry continued calmly. 2 moons ago I saw him change numbers on 3 contracts while the sheriff looked away. He makes debts grow like weeds, choking hope from those who sign." The judge leaned forward. "These are serious allegations. Do you have proof beyond your word?" A heavy silence fell over the church. This was the moment that could break them. One man's word against another's. And in this territory, white men's papers usually won against Indian testimony. Then Christine stood, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. "Your Honor, I wish to speak." Judge Albright nodded. "Proceed, Miss Devlin." Christine moved to stand before the pulpit, facing not just the judge but the entire community. Her hands were clasped tightly before her, but her chin was high. "I will not deny what I was," she began. "Yes, I worked in the Silver Dollar Saloon as a pay girl. I was young, alone, and desperate when Mr. Crane offered me work. I signed a paper agreeing to sing and serve drinks for wages." She took a deep breath, then continued, "But the contract before you now is not what I signed. The amount has been changed, interest added, terms twisted until they became chains instead of agreement. I have known other girls trapped the same way, worked until they broke or died, never able to pay off debts that grew faster than their earnings." The church was utterly silent now, every eye fixed on her. Even the sheriff looked uncomfortable. "I am not proud of my past," Christine said, her voice breaking slightly, "but I am not ashamed to stand here and speak truth. I have found honest work here, teaching children, nursing the sick. I have found good people willing to see me as I am now, not what I was. Most of all, I have found God's grace showing me I am not property to be bought and sold, but a soul worthy of redemption." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she stood straight and proud. "I ask this court to free me from false papers and let me live in truth. Judge me as I am today, not by chains forged in darkness." The church remained silent as she returned to her seat. Even Crane seemed momentarily speechless, his usual arrogance shaken by her raw honesty. Ethan took her hand as she sat, his eyes shining with pride and tenderness. Around them, faces that had once shown scorn now reflected respect and something like shame for their harsh judgments. Judge Albright's stern expression had softened almost imperceptibly as he studied both the contract before him and the woman who had spoken so bravely. The weight of his coming decision hung in the air like winter frost, sharp and crystalline, as all present waited to learn if truth and courage would triumph over power and greed. Judge Albright held the contract up to the light streaming through the church windows, his weathered fingers tracing each line with methodical precision. The assembled crowd held their breath, watching as he pulled a small magnifying glass from his vest pocket and began examining the document even more closely. "Most interesting," he muttered, adjusting his spectacles. "Most interesting indeed." Crane shifted in his seat, his previous smirk fading as the judge's inspection continued. The sheriff's confident expression likewise began to waver. "Mr. Crane," Judge Albright said finally, his voice cutting through the tension, "would you care to explain why the ink used to write the interest rate appears markedly different from the rest of this document?" A low murmur rippled through the church. Crane stood abruptly, his face flushing. "Different ink means nothing, Your Honor. Papers get amended in business all the time." "Indeed." The judge's tone was dry as dust. "And would you also care to explain why the date of signing appears to have been altered? The original numbers show clearly beneath the overwrites." The murmuring grew louder. Christine gripped Ethan's hand tighter, hardly daring to breathe. "Furthermore," Judge Albright continued, "the paper itself shows different aging patterns where certain terms appear to have been carefully scraped away and rewritten, most notably in the sections regarding debt amounts and payment terms." He laid the contract flat on the pulpit and looked directly at Crane. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen many attempts at document falsification, some clever, some crude. This, sir, falls somewhere in between." Crane's face had grown purple with rage. "This is outrageous, you cannot possibly suggest." "I suggest nothing," the judge cut him off sharply. "I state plain facts. This contract shows clear evidence of alteration after its original signing. The dates don't align, the inks don't match, and the paper itself tells the tale of tampering." The sheriff stepped forward looking uncomfortable. "Your Honor, surely a few irregularities don't invalidate." "Irregularities?" Judge Albright's voice cracked like a whip. "Sheriff Wilkes, what I hold here is not merely irregular, it is fraudulent, and you, sir, have been party to enforcing this fraud." The sheriff's face went pale. He took a step back, no longer meeting Crane's furious gaze. "This is a sham," Crane bellowed, slamming his fist on the wooden railing. "A mockery of justice. You take the word of a fallen woman and a heathen over a respected businessman?" "I take the evidence before my eyes," Judge Albright replied calmly, "and it speaks clearly enough." More voices rose from the crowd now, no longer whispers but clear words. She was telling the truth all along. "Look how Crane rages, guilty as sin. Poor girl, trapped by false papers." Christine buried her face against Ethan's shoulder, tears flowing freely. His strong arm held her close, his own eyes glistening as he watched justice unfold. The judge lifted his gavel. "Having examined the evidence and heard testimony from multiple witnesses, I find this contract to be fraudulent and therefore void under the law. Furthermore, I am ordering an investigation into all contracts held by Mr. Crane, with particular attention to his dealings with other young women." The gavel struck with finality. "This contract is hereby dissolved. Miss Devlin is free of all claimed obligations. This court's ruling is final." The sound of the gavel echoed through the church like a gunshot. For a moment, perfect silence fell. Then Crane exploded. "You'll regret this, all of you." He knocked over his chair as he stormed toward the door. "I'll see this territory burn before I let my business be ruined by a judge fooled by a whore's tears." "That's enough," Ethan's voice boomed through the church as he rose to his full height. "One more word against her, Crane, and you'll answer to me." Crane spun around, spittle flying from his lips as he pointed a trembling finger. "You're finished too, Mountain Man. Both of you will pay for this." But his threats rang hollow now. The sheriff wouldn't meet his eyes. The townsfolk who had once cowered before him now stared back with open contempt. His power was crumbling like sand. With a final curse, Crane slammed through the church doors and vanished into the street. The tension broke. People began moving, talking, some coming forward to speak to the judge. But most eyes turned to where Christine still sat with Ethan's arm around her. Mrs. Talbot was the first to approach, her young son by her side. "Miss Christine," she said softly, "I want you to know. What you did today was brave, and we were wrong, many of us, judging you without knowing your heart." Others followed, offering quiet words of support or simply respectful nods. No one whispered "harlot" or turned away. They saw her now, really saw her, as she truly was. Henry approached, touching his heart in greeting. "You spoke with great courage, sister. The truth has set you free." Christine could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to whisper, "Thank you. Thank you all." When the church had nearly emptied, she turned to Ethan, her hands clasping his larger ones. "You gave me back my life," she whispered, voice trembling with emotion. "Standing by me, believing in me, fighting for me. You gave me everything." Ethan's eyes were moist as he gazed down at her. "No, Christine," he said softly, his deep voice gentle as a summer breeze. "You gave me mine. All these years alone, I never knew what I was missing until you showed me. Your courage, your kindness, your faith. You've taught me what real strength means." Judge Albright approached them, contract in hand. "Miss Devlin," he said kindly, "would you like to do the honors?" Understanding dawned in her eyes. With trembling fingers, Christine took the fraudulent contract. Slowly, deliberately, she tore it in half, then quarters, then smaller still, until the papers that had chained her were nothing but confetti. The judge nodded approvingly. "A new life begins today," he said. "Make it a good one." With a small bow, he departed, leaving them alone in the church. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting golden patterns on the wooden floor. The same church that had once barred its doors to them now felt like holy ground, consecrated by truth and justice. Ethan helped Christine to her feet. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. She smiled through her tears, radiant with newfound freedom. "Yes," she whispered. "Home." Together they walked out of the church into the bright winter day, leaving behind the torn fragments of the past and stepping into a future built on truth, trust, and love that had been tested in fire and emerged stronger than ever. Stars glittered like diamonds scattered across black velvet as Ethan and Christine made their way up the mountain path toward home. The fresh snow crunched beneath their boots, each step breaking the pristine surface with a satisfying crackle. Their breaths formed little clouds in the frigid air, dancing upward to join the crystalline night sky. Christine's hand rested in the crook of Ethan's elbow as he guided her along the familiar trail. Neither spoke much. The night felt too sacred for idle chatter. The victory at the church still hummed in their hearts, but now a deeper current flowed beneath their shared silence. When they reached the cabin, its dark shape hulking against the starlit snow, Ethan helped Christine up the steps. Inside, darkness greeted them, broken only by faint moonlight filtering through the window panes. The familiar scents of pine wood and hearth ash wrapped around them like a welcome. "Let me get that fire going," Ethan said softly, moving to the hearth. His big hands worked swiftly, arranging kindling and striking the flint. Soon, a small flame caught and grew, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Christine hung her shawl on its peg and moved to the fire's warmth, rubbing her cold hands together. As the flames grew higher, she began to hum softly, an old hymn her mother had taught her as a child. The melody filled the cabin like a blessing. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, she sang quietly, her clear voice rising pure and true in the firelit space. That saved a wretch like me. Ethan straightened from his work at the hearth, transfixed. The firelight caught the copper highlights in her hair, the gentle curve of her cheek. His heart swelled with emotions he could barely name. When the hymn ended, silence settled again, broken only by the pop and crackle of the fire. Christine turned to find Ethan watching her, his expression a mix of wonder and uncertainty. "You have the voice of an angel," he said roughly. A blush colored her cheeks. "Just songs from childhood, they comfort me still." Ethan shifted his weight, looking down at his hands. Strong hands that knew hard work but had never known tenderness. "Christine, he started, then faltered. She waited patiently, seeing the struggle in his face. "I ain't never," he tried again, his voice barely above a whisper. "That is to say, I've lived alone so long, never known a woman's touch. I reckon I don't rightly know how to be a proper husband." Understanding softened Christine's features. With gentle grace, she crossed to where he stood and took one of his large hands in both of hers. "Ethan Hale," she said softly, "do you think I care about that? What I seek isn't passion alone." His eyes met hers, vulnerable as a child's. "I want a partner," she continued. "A home. A future built on trust and faith." Her fingers tightened on his. "You've already given me more than any man ever has. You gave me respect, protection, belief in my worth." Ethan's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "But surely you deserve more than a rough mountain man who can barely string two words together around womenfolk." "What I deserve," and Christine said firmly, "is a good man who fears God and treats me with kindness. I've known plenty of smooth-talking men with wandering hands and lying hearts." She reached up to touch his cheek. "Give me instead a man who stumbles over his words because they come straight from his heart." Something broke open in Ethan's chest, a dam of loneliness he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. Without conscious thought, he sank to his knees beside the hearth, pulling Christine down with him. "Lord," he prayed hoarsely, "I ain't worthy of this blessing you've sent me, but I swear before you now to cherish her all my days, to protect her with my life, to love her with all my heart." Christine's eyes filled with tears as she knelt beside him. "And I swear," she whispered, "to be faithful and true, to make a home worthy of your blessing, to love this good man you've given me until my dying day." Their impromptu prayers rose with the wood smoke toward heaven. When they finished, a peace settled over them both, the peace that comes with complete honesty before God and each other. "We should sleep," Christine said softly after a while. "It's been a long day." Ethan nodded, helping her to her feet. As had become their custom, she made up her bed near the hearth while he climbed to his loft. But tonight, the distance between them felt different. Not a barrier, but a bridge they would cross in God's own time. Sleep came easily to them both, deep and peaceful under the starlit mountain sky. The fire burned low, its warmth wrapping around them like a blessing. Dawn broke clear and cold, sunlight sparkling on the fresh snow. Ethan woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Christine humming as she worked at the hearth. He was just climbing down from the loft when a knock came at the door. Mrs. Talbot stood on the porch, a covered basket in her arms. Behind her, Henry sat tall on his pinto pony, a fresh-killed deer draped across his saddle. "Good morning," Mrs. Talbot said warmly. "We thought you might welcome some company for breakfast. I've brought fresh bread." Christine's face lit up with surprise and joy. "Please come in, the coffee's just ready." Henry swung down from his horse, bringing the venison with him. "Good meat for good friends," he said simply, touching his heart in greeting. Soon the cabin was filled with warmth and life. Mrs. Talbot showed Christine her secret for making the lightest biscuits, while Henry and Ethan dressed the deer meat. The smell of coffee and wood smoke mingled with fresh bread and friendly conversation. Christine moved among their guests with natural grace, pouring coffee and serving plates. Her eyes met Ethan's across the room, sharing a moment of quiet wonder. After so many months of isolation and judgment, Their home was finally filled with the sounds of friendship and acceptance. "My Tommy still talks about how you saved him," Mrs. Talbot said, breaking off a piece of warm bread. "Says you've got healing hands, Christine." "God's grace alone," Christine demurred, but her cheeks glowed with pleasure. "The people are seeing with new eyes now," Henry observed, his dark eyes wise. "Truth has a way of changing hearts." Ethan watched Christine among their guests, confident, gracious, radiating joy. The sight filled his heart near to bursting. This was what he'd prayed for all those lonely years, though he hadn't known it then. Not just a wife, but a true partner to share his life, to fill his home with warmth and welcome. As morning lengthened toward noon, more neighbors began arriving. Word had spread about the court victory, and each brought something to share: preserves, dried apples, a ham, fresh eggs. Each offering was a gesture of acceptance, an admission of changed hearts. Christine received them all with the same gentle grace, her eyes bright with happy tears. The cabin that had once felt so isolated now hummed with community and friendship. The tide had indeed turned, washing away old prejudices and bringing new beginnings. Looking around at the gathered neighbors, at Henry's quiet dignity, at Mrs. Talbot's maternal warmth, at Ethan's steadfast presence, Christine felt her heart might burst with gratitude. This was what she'd dreamed of during those dark nights in the saloon. Not just escape, but belonging. Not just survival, but a real life, rich with meaning and connection. The morning passed in a blur of conversation and sharing, of coffee cups refilled and stories exchanged. When the last neighbor had gone, leaving behind good wishes and promises to return, Christine stood in the doorway watching them descend the snowy path. Ethan came up behind her, his solid presence warming her back. "You've brought life to this old cabin," he said softly. "Made it a real home at last." She leaned back against him, content. "We did it together," she replied, "just as we'll face whatever comes next. Together." Winter settled deep in the mountains, wrapping Ethan's homestead in a blanket of pristine white. The days fell into a gentle rhythm, as natural as breathing. Each morning, Ethan would rise before dawn, pulling on his heavy boots and coat to brave the bitter cold. The crack of his axe against wood would echo through the crisp air as he built up their supply of firewood, his breath forming clouds in the frozen morning. Inside the cabin, Christine created her own warmth. Her fingers flew steady and sure across fabric squares, stitching together quilts from scraps of cloth they'd traded for in town. The soft whisper of thread through fabric and the steady click of her needle filled the cozy space, while soup simmered on the hearth. Their suppers together became precious moments of peace. They'd sit close by the fire, bowls balanced on their knees, sharing the simple pleasure of hot food and quiet company. Sometimes Ethan would catch himself staring at Christine's profile in the flickering light, still amazed that God had brought this gentle soul into his life. When fierce mountain storms howled outside, they found comfort in each other's presence. Huddled near the hearth, Ethan would read from his worn Bible by lamplight, his deep voice steady against the wind's wail. Christine would lean close, working on her quilting as she listened, finding strength in the familiar words of Scripture. "The Lord is my shepherd," Ethan would read, his rough finger tracing the lines. "I shall not want." One particularly bitter evening, as snow fell thick outside their windows, a knock startled them both. Opening the door, they found Mrs. Talbot and several other townspeople on their doorstep, stamping snow from their boot. "Brrr. We've come with an invitation," Mrs. Talbot announced, her cheeks red from the cold. "The congregation would be honored if you'd join us for Sunday service." Ethan stiffened, remembering all too clearly the preacher's harsh words, the turned backs, the whispered condemnation. His hand tightened on the doorframe, but Christine stepped forward, laying her hand gently on his arm. "Perhaps it's time," she said softly. "We can't hide away forever." Looking down into her hopeful face, Ethan felt his resistance crumble. "Reckon you're right," he muttered. That Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Ethan hitched the horses to the wagon with trembling hands while Christine dressed in her best calico dress. The ride to town was silent, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts and prayers. The little church stood white against the winter sky, smoke curling from its chimney. As Ethan helped Christine down from the wagon, they could hear the murmur of voices inside. Taking a deep breath, they climbed the steps together. The wooden doors creaked open. Every head turned as they entered, and Ethan felt his face flush hot. But instead of the expected scorn, they found curious, even welcoming faces. Mrs. Talbot waved them to a seat, and other neighbors nodded in greeting. Preacher Avery stood at his pulpit, his stern face unusually troubled. As the last hymn faded, he cleared his throat. "Before we begin today's sermon," he said, his voice carrying to every corner, "I have something to say." He paused, gripping the pulpit edge. "I have done wrong in God's eyes." A ripple of surprise ran through the congregation. Christine's hand found Ethan's and squeezed tight. "I let pride and judgment blind me," the preacher continued, his voice growing thick. "I forgot that our Lord Jesus sat with those society scorned. I forgot that his grace extends to all who truly seek him." His eyes found Christine's. "I have witnessed a transformation in our midst, not just in those I wrongly condemned, but in my own hard heart." Tears began sliding down Christine's cheeks. Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his own eyes burning. "If you are willing," Preacher Avery said, looking directly at them now, "I would be honored to properly bless your union before God and this congregation." A collective gasp filled the church, followed by a sudden burst of applause. Mrs. Talbot was openly weeping, and even Henry, standing quietly at the back, smiled broadly. Christine buried her face in Ethan's shoulder, her tears soaking his shirt. He held her close, his heart too full for words. All around them, the congregation continued clapping, years of prejudice washing away in waves of acceptance and joy. Through her tears, Christine lifted her face to the preacher and nodded. "We would be blessed," she managed to say. Ethan could only add his own nod, overcome by God's mysterious ways. The same church that had once barred its doors to them now opened its arms wide, proving that faith and love could indeed turn the bitterest scorn into the sweetest acceptance. The week before the wedding hummed with activity. Women from town gathered at Mrs. Talbot's house, their needles flashing as they transformed plain muslin into Christine's wedding dress. Each stitch carried prayers and well wishes, replacing old judgments with new hope. Children darted through the snowy woods, gathering fragrant pine boughs to deck the church. Their laughter echoed across the valley as they dragged their treasures into town. In his workshop, Ethan's knife carefully shaped a small wooden box for the rings, his big hands surprisingly delicate at the task. The night before their wedding, they sat together by the hearth. "I ain't much good at fancy words," Ethan admitted, his voice rough with emotion. Christine touched his weathered hand. "Your gentle heart is worth more than gold to me." Outside, snow fell soft and silent while they bowed their heads in prayer. In town, Preacher Avery arranged candles throughout the church, preparing for tomorrow's ceremony. Even those who had once turned away now planned to witness their union, drawn by the power of redemption. Dawn broke crystal clear over the mountains, painting the snow in golden light. Wagon wheels creaked through the frost as families from distant homesteads arrived at the church, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. Inside, pine garlands draped the walls, their fresh scent mingling with lamp oil. The flames cast warm shadows across rough-hewn pews packed with familiar faces. Christine appeared in the doorway on Mrs. Talbot's arm, wearing a simple muslin gown that seemed to glow in the lamplight. Her eyes shone with joyful tears as she walked forward. At the altar, Ethan's large frame trembled slightly. His usual shyness melted away when he saw her, replaced by wonder. Preacher Avery's voice cracked with emotion as he spoke the blessing. When Ethan and Christine exchanged their vows, sniffles echoed through the church. The children's voices rose sweet and clear in Christine's favorite hymn, while Henry watched from the back, nodding his approval. Their kiss brought thunderous applause. Ethan held his bride close, no longer the lonely mountain man, but a husband honored before God and community. Christine, once scorned, stood tall beside him, finally home. That evening, Ethan guided the wagon home through drifts of pristine snow. Moonlight sparkled on the white-capped mountains, turning their world into silver. The cabin windows glowed warmly, welcoming them. Inside, they discovered treasures left by neighbors, fresh baked bread still wrapped in cloth, jars of sweet preserves lined up on the shelf, and colorful quilts folded neatly on their bed. Christine hung her shawl on the wooden peg by the door, her eyes bright with joy as she took in the cabin, now truly her home. They shared a quiet supper of bread and stew, their hands clasped across the rough-hewn table. Neither needed many words. Their shining eyes said everything. After the dishes were cleared, Ethan took out his old fiddle. The gentle notes of Amazing Grace filled their home as Christine's clear voice joined in harmony. Together, they knelt by the crackling hearth, giving thanks for mercy and new beginnings. "This home will never be lonely again," Ethan whispered softly. Beyond their walls, the ancient mountains stood silent sentinel, witnesses to their hard-won happiness. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.